I am not a fan of limits. So when you pose a question that is, a little bit difficult, such as, what do you do when you can't help everyone? I'm one of those people who's very likely to steeple my fingertips and look at you and say, but what if we can? I grew up in the church, surrounded by imagery and role models and examples of service and servanthood. We had songs like, "Make me a servant, humble and meek." Some of you may know that one. We had stories like the story of, I'm doing a TED Talk, the Good Samaritan. We had stories like the stories of the Good Samaritan, in which a man is robbed, beaten up, and left for dead by the side of the road. And a Samaritan, so in the context of the story, a person with absolutely no obligation or relation to this random hurting stranger, decides to put him on his donkey and carry him to an inn where he pays for his long-term care and healing. These are the kind of role models we have. We also have the story of the widow who gave her last 2 copper coins to the temple for an offering. She gave everything she had. We also have people like my father, who was a pastor and a chaplain for a hospital for over 30 years. And every day he would go to work and he would help and he would serve. And then every night he would come home and he would help and he would serve. He was very active in our upbringing. I not only saw him serve, but he expected us to serve too. And we didn't have a lot of money growing up, as a lot of people don't have a lot of money growing up. And so he expected us not to give money, but to give our time, our talents, our skills, our energy to causes that we cared about. A lot of these examples, though, showed me a difficult side of service. I saw this in my dad when he would come home from work after working with a child who had passed away, who maybe he had worked with for years and finally was able to say final prayers over. I saw this behind the scenes at church, where I saw people who were serving, but they were serving from a place of obligation or pain. They had to be there. They were doing this not out of love, but out of something else. And they would say, "I love doing this, but boy, does it hurt." So growing up, I saw these different instances of what it meant to serve and help other people. And in my child's mind, I began to form some very, incorrect equations, one of which is that pain is the currency of service. This is how I found myself several decades later, hauling wheelbarrows full of cement and lifting buckets full of rocks through a very shaky structure made of rebar and recycled wooden planks in a developing country. It was not necessarily my forte. I'm maybe not built for manual labor, but I decided I want to do it anyway. And this is how I found myself crying in my bunk. Part of it was because I was in immense physical pain. I'm not used to construction work, obviously. My arms hurt, my legs hurt, my skin was scraped and chapped and sunburned. My feet and my hands were blistered. I had a migraine from being out in the sun all day. I had hit my physical limits, those limits that I'm not a fan of. But aside from the physical pain, I also was feeling an intense emotional pain. I had proven to myself just how little I was worth. I had proven to myself that I could not lift this bucket of rocks over my head. And I had to go to the foreman and say, "I need help." And he said, "Okay, why don't you just go over there for a while?" Somebody else just very easily started lifting these like million-pound buckets of rocks into the cement mixer, because that's what you do. I learned that not only could I not help everyone, but I couldn't even help everyone on my tiny little construction crew. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't oblivious to pain enough. The funny thing is, I did this 3 times. I took 3 separate trips to the same country, expecting each time that because I was doing it for a good cause, something would happen, Like I'd be able to move mountains. Instead of moving mountains, I got dismissed from working on a retaining wall on the side of a hill. I had hit my physical limits. So then I tried something a little closer to home. I'm a millennial, so just like growing up, I still don't have money, but I do have my time, my energy, my talents and skills. And best of all, no offense to anyone, but a great boon to me when I'm saying that I want to volunteer for something, no kids. People love that. This is how I found myself as the president of my church congregation, teaching vacation Bible school, teaching Sunday school, teaching the volunteer preschool music program despite having 0 music training, giving free talks around the nation and using my PTO from work to travel to these talks, mentoring people, and in addition to mentoring people, sort of sub-mentoring people by having coffee with people several times a week, during which they would pick my brain about marketing matters, because at the time I was working 40 hours a week as well. And in addition to working those 40 hours a week, I was also practicing servant leadership at work without commensurate pay. And then in a final mighty act of hubris, like this is like big scale hubris, I somehow appointed myself a chaplain of the workplace. And I said, I'm here to help people. And so I would look around like, oh, you look like you're struggling with something. Let's have an intentional talk over lunch, over coffee. Let me help you share that burden. Let me take that on for you. I saw it as my responsibility to uplift and take on the burdens of every single person around me. And maybe you felt this way before too. So basically, here I was, completely unable to live within this mousetrap of a schedule, of a life that I had created for myself. Basically, things were not great. I had 0 margin in my life. I was a constant tangle of stress, anxiety, overwhelmedness, and helplessness. I saw rest as a luxury I couldn't afford. I was sick all the time, and I even got walking pneumonia, which was its own delight. I was in this weird race to the bottom. I was in this weird race to the bottom to become the biggest, I don't want to say the biggest victim, the biggest servant, the person who could hold the most pain for other people. Probably pretty obviously to you, this was a very unhealthy and actively harmful place to be. Also predictably, I don't think I was actually helping anyone. I was turning into a burned out little husk that had begun to hate and resent not only the people I was helping, but myself. It's good to have friends. I had some friends who would take the time and look at me and put a hand on my shoulder and say, hey, are you okay? Are you taking the time to rest and recharge? And what I couldn't tell them is, no, it's cool. It's cool. God wants me to suffer. This is cool. I've got this. Instead, I lied. And I said, oh, no, it's fine. After this, I'm going to go home and I'm going to have dinner with my husband and we're going to watch some Netflix and I'm going to go to bed. It's going to be fine. And then I would go home and I would work. I heard the very popular illusions of the oxygen mask. So, if you're on a plane, FAA regulations indicate something. I can recite this. But you're supposed to put on your own oxygen mask before helping the person next to you with theirs. And the intention with that is so that you are equipped with everything you need to help someone else next to you. Take care of yourself first, then help people. Makes sense. Another analogy that a friend used was the full cup analogy. And that was, hey, if you're going to be the type of person who pours yourself out for other people, if you're the cup, you better have something in there to pour out. You'd better have something in there so that you're not pouring out nothingness to people. It benefits everyone for you to have a full cup. It makes sense. And logically, these made sense to me. I understood them on an intellectual level, but I did not understand them in my heart. They didn't matter to me because I didn't matter. I had, in addition to pain being the currency of service, I had some very wrong understandings about what it meant to help, love, and serve other people. And I'm sharing this with you because I've seen other people struggle with this as well. So to be a servant meant putting others before yourself. That sounds pretty good. It's all well and good until you rationalize that in order to do that, you need to define yourself as inherently less than other people. Less important, less worthy, less deserving, and even less human. What about serving? To serve means to give or sacrifice for someone. And that's all well and good until you equate sacrifice with loss, or until what you're giving is everything, until you become that depressed little husk of your former self. Finally, to become selfless, that's something we all aspire to. To become selfless, you must die to yourself and live for others. And okay, that sounds great. Until you realize that to me, and maybe to some of you, it meant losing myself and my own desires completely and doing it with a smile on my face. It wasn't until a few years later that I realized I was very effectively trying to destroy myself. Like many of you in this room, I've struggled with depression, anxiety, and feelings of worthlessness my entire life. And these feelings dovetailed in a very interesting way with the lessons of service and martyrdom that I had taken away from my upbringing. Self-loathing, fear, self-hatred, and self-harm all came together in this perfect little package and found a home inside of martyrdom. I felt so worthless that I said, you know what? If I'm not going to be worth anything as a person, maybe I can be worth something as a martyr. This was a very dangerous way to think because it made it permissible and even encouraged for me to hurt myself. Helping others meant I was free to neglect myself. Living for others meant I could die to myself. Being a martyr meant I could hide behind a mask of piety. I could rationalize what I was doing. I could send away people who were concerned. Ironically, the thing that helped me to heal and change was yet another attempt to help everyone. I started a blog in 2013 called The Outlaw Novelist. I've always had a passion for writing and storytelling and creating. And I wanted to share that with people just as a hobby. Eventually, there's a lot of reasons, but essentially, since the blogging space was so crowded, I decided, thanks to a very good friend, to try podcasting. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it better than blogging, even though I identified as a writer, because I could speak truth and not worry about the trappings of grammar and formatting and who's going to judge me on how good this writing is. I could be honest and I could be myself and I could share my story. And so I started doing that. And it wasn't until I started receiving letters from people and emails that I realized that maybe this was a healthier act of service. I got letters from people who said, I would not have published my book without your podcast. Thank you. Thank you for showing me your journey. Thank you for showing me that it's not perfect. Thank you for being honest. The thing with podcasting was I didn't have to push against any limits. I didn't have to force anything. I got to work with my strengths instead. I got to create something out of joy and love, and it felt so good. In 2017, I started my second podcast, which is a fictional show or an audio drama called Girl in Space. It's a sci-fi show. It's about a girl in space. It's pretty self-explanatory. But what I decided to do in this show was serve people in yet another way. The mission statement of this show was to help people feel like they are not alone. They are not floating out there in space. There are so many people here to help them. The ripple effect got bigger and bigger. I got more and more people forming communities around both of these shows and sharing the message of joy and love. I started getting speaking gigs on the topics that I espoused in my shows. Best of all, I found worth in a way that didn't hurt. It took me a long time to understand that suffering is not a virtue. Good people suffer, but suffering is not a virtue. We need to stop glorifying it. We need to stop treating it like we treat busy, like, oh, I'm busy, so I'm important. No. If you're suffering, please get help. Service does not have to mean misery and suffering. Service can be fun and fulfilling. And I'm not talking about the kind that you see on kids' TV shows where they're like, let's make cleanup a game. No. Service can be good for you and for the people that you're helping. Because the value of service isn't in how much you lose or give or suffer. Someone else's gain does not have to equal your loss. This is not a race to be the biggest victim. You can both gain, you can both thrive, and you can both find fulfillment and joy. Thank you.